Example 2. So we're looking back at the multiple treatments for depression that we looked at in the previous lesson. Now, we need to make a relative frequency table of the data, including all of the marginal frequencies. We also need to find the distribution of change in depression for subjects receiving each of the three treatments. That means when they say 4 subjects receiving each of the 3 treatments, for the 3 treatments are going to be our x-axis. We want to make a segmented bar graph, segmented into the 3 different types of response: full, partial, and none. And then describe what your graph tells us about the association between the treatment and the change in depression. So the relative frequency table, again, is just dividing by your grand total and then adding in the marginal frequencies. So I've done that already to speed us up a little bit. But these are not the numbers that go into our segmented bar graph. Instead, we need to figure out what percentage of each group felt full response. I'm going to go partial response. And lastly, no response. So we can actually get each of these by dividing the response rate by the total for that category or for that treatment. So if we are looking for what percent of St. John's wort takers felt any response, we could either use the original 27 out of 100 and what was it that we saw before? 113. We could use that, or so 27 out of 113 could be 23.9%, or 0.08 out of 0.334 should also be about 23.9% within some rounding parameters. So I'm going to use the rounded parameters right now, using our 0.08 and our 0.337. So 23.7%, so a little bit over 20, felt full response with the St. John's wort. Keep that 0.237 idea, because now if 0.047 out of our 0.334 felt partial response, that's another 0.141, and we need to add that on top of our 0.237. So 0.378 is where we will get up to. So 37 should be somewhere kind of here, where we got a partial response. And no response should be the rest of them, our 0.207 out of our 0.334, 0.62. If we add what we've already done, we should get something that is very, very, very close to 1. Again, this is because I rounded a little bit in here. But this is the group with no response. With Zoloft, we had about the same response rate for full, 0.077 out of 0.323. Oh, sorry, I did that wrong. 0.08 out of 0.323. We actually got a 24.7, which, okay, that one worked out this time for me. 0.077 out of our 0.323 is 0.238 plus that 0.277 that we already knew about, or 247. Gets us up to about 0.486, so just below 50. So partial response seems to be a little bit better with the Zoloft. And then the rest had no response. But that's not super duper changed from what we saw before. It's still kind of the same full response rate and maybe a little bit of a difference in the partial response rate. But it doesn't seem to have made a big improvement. And for the placebo, 0.109 out of 0.343, about 31.8%, 0.318. So 30% would be somewhere around there. Had full response, 0.038 divided by 0.343, and we will add that to our answer there. Gets us up to about 0.429. So somewhere in there is our partial response. And the rest had no response. And so because our three segments of the graph, here, let's actually fill this in a little bit more. Let's make that easier to read. You can always change. And I forgot to label type of treatment. So again, it doesn't look like very much changed in between any of those three graphs. It's actually the St. John's wort might be a little bit less effective in some ways. But there is not much change. There's not much difference. So because of that, none of these three really gives us an idea of what is going to be more effective. Let me just double check one thing. Make sure I'm giving you guys the right interpretation here before I write it down. Yeah. Oh, they asked what is the association. There does not seem to be much association because it doesn't matter what version of the treatment you took, nothing really seemed to change. Because remember, the placebo is just a sugar pill that they tell you is medicine. So again, nothing really seemed to change in the graph, so there doesn't really seem to be any association between the treatment that you get and how strong the response feels.